We're examining different facets of fundamentals of theology together, not intending to be a full-blown seminary class taking 2-3 years, but really a tight look at areas and realms of God's nature and character, the nature of mankind, the nature of sin, and so on. And today we come to the subject of the covenants. And using Nehemiah 9 as a little bit of a background, we see this idea that God is a covenant-keeping God, and we have to wonder what that is. For example, in chapter 9, verse 8, you found his heart, that is Abraham, faithful before you, made him the covenant to give to his offspring the land of the Canaanite, the Hittite, and so on. And so there's a reference there to a covenant that is very important for the Israelites at the time of Nehemiah to understand. Now, what's the difference in time from Nehemiah to Abraham? It's about 1,500 years. Is that right? Yeah, like 2000 BC, and this is about like 500, 600 BC. So am I mathing right? Because BC is always backwards. So 2000 BC to 600 BC or so, yeah, about 1,400 years. So this is a significant promise. It's hard for us to imagine because America's being a very relatively young nation, but just imagine if the first settlers, the Puritans, had made some kind of promise that one of their descendants from one of the 3 original ships that came over, that say that one of those families was made a promise, and that promise now would only still be for 250 years. But we're talking about 4 or 5 times, 6 times that amount of time has passed from Nehemiah to Abraham, and they're still clinging to a promise made to one man, in other words. And that says not so much something about Abraham, but something about God. God is called a covenant-keeping God in this passage, and that he is faithful to do what he has said. And in response to it, at the very end of Nehemiah 9, verse 38, because of all this, we make a firm covenant in writing. So the idea of a covenant is an important theological term for us to understand. Now, what is a covenant specifically, or what is the idea of a covenant? Well, really, it's just, strictly speaking, it's just a contract between 2 parties or 2 or more parties. It is a deal. Here's your end of the deal, here's my end, and if either of us breaks it, here's the consequence. It's as straightforward and simple as that. That's all a covenant is. Now, the fact that God has covenants, though, with mankind, that's a big deal. Because when you think about it, why does God have to make anybody any kind of deal? When I go to the car dealership, there's something I want, there's something the car salesman wants, right? And so we got to negotiate, or we are going to talk about the terms of the contract, and we have, let's say, competing interests, so to speak, because I want this car as cheap as I possibly can, he wants a commission, and so we got to find some kind of compromise. Or in the time of the ancient Near East, when this was being written, you would have one nation would conquer another nation, and now that other nation is beholden to this other greater nation that's conquered in. So you'd make a covenant saying, you need to give us a certain amount of tribute. And the relationship is a little bit more one-sided. One person doesn't even want to be in that kind of contract, whereas the other person is the sole beneficiary. So when you think, though, of God entering into contract or covenant with anybody, it seems to make it sound like God is the one who has to negotiate to get what he wants, or he has to make bargain, find a bargain or deal. And when you think about God, cannot God just take or have or do whatever he wants? Why does he need to enter into a covenant at all with anybody when he can just, be owed it, do it, create it? So it's very significant then that God, in a sense, condescends himself, humbles himself, becomes even a servant, at the end of a contract deal, promising to another something. Not necessarily negotiating, but just think of it as relating to others. These covenants of God represent God's dealings with mankind. Now, what's interesting is in the ancient Near East, and at this time here in Nehemiah and prior, all the way back to Abraham, you would cut a covenant. Just like we say, let's cut a deal. Well, you would cut a covenant. And in fact, the word for covenant in Hebrew comes from the word to cut. It's a berit. It comes from barat, which is to cut. Why? Because at that time, when you cut a deal with someone, when you cut a covenant, made a covenant with someone, you would seal it in blood. You'd literally cut an animal in half, right? And sometimes the ritual, there's various forms of rituals, different ways you could ratify it, but one common one at that time was you cut an animal in half. It could be a bird, it could be a ram, it could be a bull, it could be many animals depending on the seriousness of the covenant. You cut it in half and you put one part of the animal on this side and you put the other part of the animal on this side, and you and your covenant partner would walk between them. And the idea is what? If you don't keep your end of the bargain, this should happen to you. And if I don't keep my end of the bargain, then this should happen to me. So the idea of cutting a deal, cutting a covenant, sealing something in blood, these are all biblical terms, really. It's how the ancient Near East, a lot of cultures did it. But that's also how this was done in the Bible times as well. Now, God is a willing participant in a relationship with us where there are certain duties and obligations for both parties. Like I said, God's covenants represent him dealing with mankind in a real way, in a here and now sort of way. We're going to explore some of them today. We're not going to get to all of them. Again, we are doing kind of flybys and overviews, so we're not going to exhaust any of these subjects, but we will try to fit them together or see a flow between the different dealings with God and these covenants. Some call these different dispensations. So if you ever heard the term dispensational, and our church would consider ourselves, if you're using labels, dispensational, it's really a way of saying that God has dealt with different people in different ways throughout humankind's history. So we'll see some of that today that will make a little bit more sense. But there's an overlap there of dispensations, like how God is going to dispense his grace or dispense his judgment, and the idea of covenants. God is going to deal with you and expect things of you, and he's going to do certain things because of what you do. That's kind of all one and the same. It'll make more sense as we get it. All right. Let me also say, just as a matter of introduction as well, there is only one plan of God. We might talk about different covenants that God has with people. We might talk about different dispensations per se, but there is still, and only ever has been, one plan, one unified plan of God. There's never been a plan A, plan B, plan C. There's never been a backup plan. There's never been if this, then this, if this, then this with God. No, there's only one plan, and everything everyone does is a part of that plan. We've talked about it a lot in Acts 2:22 and 23, that Jesus was crucified by the hands of sinners according to the predetermined plan of God. You have Luke 22:22, the Son of Man goes as has been told of him, but woe to the one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed, speaking of Judas. So even Judas' betrayal of Jesus happened according to the predetermined plan of God. 1 Peter 1:20, talking about the foreknowledge of God and so on. So however you want to say it, though, ultimately there is just one plan, God's plan. There's one way, God's way. Talked about it yesterday in Proverbs with the men's breakfast, that a man establishes his steps, or man plans in his heart, but God establishes his steps. And that is all to say, there's only ever been one plan. None of these covenants or dispensations represent, that didn't work, let me try again. Nope, I really thought this Abraham thing was going to work out, but we're going to have to do this instead. It's only ever been one plan, one purpose in God's mind. Let's begin at the beginning. Always a great start to a place to start. In Genesis 1, 2, and 3, you have a relationship between God and Adam and Eve. first two human beings. There is a relationship and a dynamic. There's an expectation and obligation that is set up from the very beginning. What is the foundation of the original relationship between God and man after God makes everything and after he makes humankind? What does he tell them to do? In Genesis 1:28, God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on earth." And God furthermore talks about how he's providing food for them and so on. So God is telling Adam and Eve, here is what your job is. Here's your end of the deal. I'm providing this creation for you. I'm giving you food to eat. Here you are, and you are to be the masters of the earth, to be fruitful and multiply, to be cared for by me. And we know that is implied a relationship to God. God is going to be there and talking with them and walking with them. So have this relationship with me. He also gives them one other command besides essentially enjoy and subdue or be masters of this creation. He says, also, by the way, there is this one tree. And God commands them, Genesis 2:16, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. So, there's a few commands here at the beginning. It's not explicitly stated as a covenant per se, but if we're just talking in terms of dispensations or how God is dealing with man, here we have the first two human beings, and the relationship is God is making them stewards over the whole creation. Plenty to eat, plenty to do, plenty to see. You have a companion, and you get to relate to God. That sounds fantastic. Sounds phenomenal. You would hope and wish that the Bible ends there at Genesis 2. Well, what's all this about? What's all this? This is the mess you made, right? This is because, and God knew it. All right, this is not a surprise to God. This is not, oh, great. It was supposed to end here, but now we had to do all these shenanigans to get to basically back where we started in Revelation 21, No, all part of God's plan, but the beginning is good. Everything is set up, the relationship to God, the relationship to each other, the relationship to the world, it's all in harmony. But you know how it goes. In Genesis 3, they are tempted, they fall into sin. This results in the consequence of sin. God gave them a stipulation. Right? If you eat from this tree, you will surely die. And so it happens that the process of death enters into the world. The spiritual separation between them and God is become realized or actualized in their eyes opening. They see that they are naked. They are ashamed of their sin and who they are. And God gives them a layout of another plan. You might call it a covenant, if you will, and there's maybe more reason to think that. I'll give that to you in a second, but he makes a covenant in a way to the serpent in verses 14 and 15. Curses him. He's going to eat dust all the days of his life. There's going to be enmity between the serpent and the woman, and between your offspring, her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So there is going to be hostility between the work of Satan and his works and humanity, and really the fruit of God's creation, which is all of these offspring. But the woman will have a seed that will one day crush the head of the serpent, meaning putting an end to his works. The woman also gets a covenant, you could say, and that is a pain in childbearing, but also a promise of childbearing. So it could have easily been, we're going to scrap this whole plan. But no, be fruitful and multiply is still going to apply, but there's going to be a reminder in every pregnancy and every child of the pain that sin has, that you brought into the world, and you are going to continue to bring into the world by bringing little sinners into the world. And of course, there's another kind of covenant or promise, relational description of Adam given to Adam, and now you're going to work, the creation's going to be against you, and you're going to fight it all the days of your life, work will be hard, and then you're going to die and go into the dust. Now, God makes for Adam and Eve a garment of skins, verse 21. I don't know about you, but I don't know any method of getting animal skins to wear without killing the animal. And by skins, we don't mean the fur off of like a sheep. Like, yes, you can do that. But when we talk about animal skins, not many animals do too well without their skin and their fur. So here we understand by this that an animal had to die in order for them to be covered. In order for their shame to be covered, an animal had to die. An animal with life had to shed its blood. And you have there kind of this first indication that the God's promises are both the consequence of sin. You know, you have these disciplines and chastenings, but also a hope and promise of salvation, of the works of Satan being crushed, and God's love and provision for them of atonement even. Atonement literally just means covering. So a covering has been made for them by the death of an animal, right? It's all baked in there. This proto-gospel is what some theologians call it. Now this is, you might say, this is an unconditional covenant, meaning that God is going to do this regardless. This is not just a contract. This is a prophecy. This is a promise. God is going to do this. There's not any question about these things happening. It's not an if-then. It's not, well, if I feel like it, or if you do this, or if you please me. These are just things God says are going to be. They're going to happen. This is what is the rest of history is going to be a fulfillment of. So, just as the judgment and consequence of sin was unilateral, the salvation from it will be unilateral as well. And from here on, there's essentially a line of thinking, you could say. Because of this promise about the woman and the seed of the woman and the offspring being at odds with the offspring of Satan, there is this idea of looking for a promised seed and hoping for a child that will fulfill this promise to the people of God, okay? So that starts it off, this idea of a seed. And that word for offspring is the word, Hebrew word for seed. Okay, so God's relationship to Adam and Eve, you're probably fairly familiar with it. Well, what happens next? What's the next significant dealing of humanity with God? And the reason this is going to be a multi-parter is because I got very invested in the Noahic covenant. And so we're going to talk about this. Maybe I was going to get to the Abrahamic, we might not, because this just compelled me as I was studying it. When we get to Genesis 6, all right, and Genesis 5 is essentially just a genealogy. Genesis 4 is the story of the first murder between Cain and Abel. So it's very quickly, like in terms of the Bible, you're reading through it, Adam and Eve have sons and they're already at odds. You already get a flavor of what has happened in the world because of sin and the conflict that sets up between humanity. Chapter 5, big old genealogy. Chapter 6, when man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to, let me skip it. That gets into Nephilim and things like that. But essentially understand that the people start to populate the globe. And, you know, they are fruitful and they multiply. We won't talk about the Nephilim today. Another time. Another time. Verse 5, Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That's oddly one of my go-to, not favorite verses in the sense that I like it, but it's one of the verses I go to a lot, and I guess in that sense a favorite, because it just flows from the tongue in a very simple way, like what the problem is and what God sees, right? Wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Just flows off of your tongue. The Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth. And we talked about that word regret, actually at the Christmas Eve service. But it's not a regret that is, I screwed up. It's a deep feeling of pain and hurt and offense. He regretted that he made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So Yahweh said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I'm sorry, same word, that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of Yahweh. Verse 11, the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence, and God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. So it's an unknown kind of tree, just so you know. Gopher wood, it's a funny thing because it's spelled there like a gopher, like the critter, but the Hebrew word is gopher. And so in English, they just went for like the animal, but I think it doesn't refer to the animal. It's an unknown kind of wood, but in Hebrew it's called that, but since it sounds like gopher, they're just like, well, people know what a gopher is, so we'll just put that there. But it gives totally the wrong impression to me. It's an unknown kind of wood. Sorry, that's for free. That's neither here nor there. All right, but you know the story. The creation had been corrupted by the sin of man. Now, typically, when we think of the flood, we associate it with God's wrath. You know, he's about to nearly annihilate all living things, including humankind. Or you associate it with, of course, the great salvation that God brought to Noah and those who were on the ark and were preserved. We think of either great judgment or great salvation. But as I was studying this past week, what occurred to me is that this is a testament to the patience of God as well. What I mean by that is, consider the whole earth is full of violence and corruption. The whole earth is full. You think it's bad now, but I don't know that I would use the phrase, every intention of the thought of their heart was only evil continually. I don't know if I'd say that about the whole planet just yet. But really, God is saying this about everyone on the face of the planet except Noah. I mean, his family get on board, but it's because they know Noah. Noah's the only one that seems to have found favor in the eyes of God. Now, I think this is an example of the patience of God because sometimes people ask why God lets so much evil happen on the earth that he could clearly stop it. Right? God's all powerful. He could stop evil on the earth. But what you're really asking then, right, is that God would execute judgment on people immediately when they sin, right? Isn't that what you're asking for? Is for God to bring swift, immediate justice as soon as someone sins. And if you think about that, is that what you really would want? Because then there'd be no one on the planet, right? If you're giving people immediate, swift justice, as soon as they do it, we'd all be dead. No one would be here. And really, people, what they say, or what they mean when they say that, is that they want God to execute judgment on certain kinds of sins and certain kinds of sinners. And though they generally mean that God should stop a sin when people kind of bring this thought experiment, this criticism of God, it's like they imagine God stopping someone like just before they pull the trigger or something, right? Well, isn't it also sin to think of the plan to commit the murder or to harbor the anger and the rage in the heart that prompts the murder? So if God really knows everything, shouldn't he immediately judge the heart, and as soon as the thought enters your mind and the motive enters your thinking, that he judges it? It doesn't make sense for people to do that, or for people to accuse God of that. But now think of this. This is the world where God is being patient with everybody. On the flip side, well, if you wanted to presume upon God, if you wanted to say, no, God shouldn't bring that kind of swift justice immediately, that would be unfair for God to just, the first thought that you have, the first sinful thing that you do, just God to immediately judge it right then and there. Well, the flip side of that is for God to let evil happen. That's the way it is. And that's the world right now. In a sense, you could think of it as God saying, all right, I'll be patient with every sin then. I'll be patient and put up and endure with all of the violence and corruption that's in the world. And that's the world you get. Now this is the part that got to me this past week. Because everything I just said, there's things I've mentioned to people before, even maybe preached about. But this is what got me is, God should not have to put up with one sin or one sinner for even 1 second, right? He doesn't deserve that. And yet he is putting up with a lot of sinners and a lot of sins constantly. You just imagine for yourself. Imagine an endless barrage of people insulting you, flipping you off, saying awful and vulgar things at you and about you and your family and everyone you love, accusing you of things you did not do, blaming you for every wrong thing, giving you the cold shoulder whenever you try to give a defense of yourself. You probably could not handle that for very long, could you? Imagine never being able to sleep because people are constantly bombarding you with criticism and hate. And you know what? That's what being God is like. That's what I'm thinking when I read this. I think God is actually being patient with all of these sinners. He's giving them second, third, fourth, fifth chance. He isn't striking them down immediately as soon as they do the first sin. He's letting them play it out. He's letting them insult him. And I got like hurt thinking, this is what being God is like, is just to have a bunch of people constantly berating you, blaming you, hating you, insulting you, being vulgar, almost striking you if they could. That's what God has to put up with all the time. Now here especially, the whole planet is all of that except one voice. There's one voice in that cacophony that he hears that's sweet, that's saying anything good, that is any kind of praise, and it's Noah. And I just cannot imagine, I don't want to make God too much like us, but, God must have found that so precious that in a world full that is in their actions and words just hostility, constant hostility towards God, here's one righteous man, and out of the clutter of complaints and bitterness and evil, God listens to, he doesn't have ears, but just imagine it that way. To this cacophony of corruption, there's one voice in the midst of it all that rings loud and clear, uttering prayers of faith and trust, and it's from Noah. And it's precious to God. God isn't like us needing to be encouraged because he gets down on himself, gets self-conscious, or, boy, I could really use a pick-me-up. God is not like that, don't get me wrong. But somehow, despite being divine and sovereign, he truly does acknowledge and bless and honor. And I think you could say is touched by the prayers of his people. And it just stood out to me. God is being so patient here. Like, I can only endure my kids nagging or being annoying for 5 minutes in the car. Just imagine a whole planet full, driving this big old RV, the world's in the back, and all of them, as you're trying to drive it, just constant badgering and annoyance and hate and complaining the whole way while you're driving this RV, 8 billion people, right, doing that. I can't put up with it. God is dealing with that. How precious, how sweet, how pleasant it is that Noah's voice, there's one voice in that cacophony saying something helpful, kind, nice. It just touches heart. And you know what? This is what occurred to me this past week. There's a lot of sinners in the world right now. a lot of sin. It's maybe more people than this. Maybe not quite every heart is as wicked as they were in the time of Noah, but we maybe have more people. And how precious and sweet is it then when God hears your voice? You know, when in the midst of all the complaining and terrible, awful things people say about God, he hears your voice. You know, real earnest, pleading with him. He loves that, you know, depending upon him, humbled before him, praising him or clinging to him, trusting him. How pleasant a sound that must be to God's ears. It just occurred to me, it's like, I need to pray more because God, you know, not that, he needs it like he gets down on himself, but it would be nice. It must be nice to hear that. You're not saying anything he doesn't know, but it is joyful to him. I think you could say that. It is pleasing to him to hear our voices crying out to him. So, I don't know, that's just a thought I had. Anyway, going back to this. Here, Noah's day, he is going to wipe out this world. He's been patient enough. I mean, at this point, there's just one guy. Everybody else is awful, terrible, in the worst way. I think worse than now, in a sense. And God has to, there's nowhere to go with this anymore. The problem is he had made a promise that he was going to raise up a seed and save a people for himself. And you're down to like one guy. And the whole world is evil and corrupt. And so God's solution, of course, is to start over, to not withhold his hand of judgment anymore, but to bring it down, not on everybody. He needs to still keep true to his promise to Adam and Eve, preserve a remnant, bring about a seed, and so he preserves Noah, his 3 sons, their wives, 8 people on this ark, and 2 of every kind of animal, 7 of the clean or pairs. And he is not going to let that promise he made be threatened by his own judgment on the world. That is to bring about this seed. So he's going to cleanse it. Worldwide judgment, of course, is prerogative and right. He's God. And just again, another reminder, it's hypocritical for man to complain that God doesn't punish sin swiftly while enjoying God's patience with our sin. So don't ask for God to bring swift judgment every single time, right when, because if he does that indiscriminately, we're all dead. We're done. There's no one left. So we must actually bank on God's patience with sin, but that means that evil is going to happen in the world, but there's always a time. There's a comeuppance. We don't know when that's going to be for any individual life, but that's his prerogative, fortunately not mine. So I'll let God decide when enough is enough for any one of the 8 billion people, and he calls them into judgment and account. All right, so God spares the world, he starts over, and you have maybe this hint. Maybe the Bible is only 8 chapters long. You know, we could have had a 2-chapter Bible, Genesis 1 and 2, but they screwed up, and maybe an 8-chapter Bible, because Noah and his sons, maybe they're the ones to get it right. You know, maybe there's a happily ever after, and we can have an 8-chapter Bible. And so in Noah, there's this, his name means rest. Maybe there is a rest. Maybe there is a peace to come on the earth, and things will be as they should have been from the get-go. Maybe Noah is the seed. That's why he's been spared. But there's a problem in that he is still a sinner. And you find that out very quickly. Before that, you have what's called the Noahic covenant. Genesis chapter 8, verse 20. Then Noah built an altar to Yahweh, and this is after, of course, the flood had receded. The ark is on dry land. Everybody gets out of the boat, stretches their limbs. First thing Noah does is he built an altar to Yahweh, took some of every clean animal, and some of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when Yahweh smelled the pleasing aroma, Yahweh said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. It's interesting that the establishment of the seasons is a part of God's covenant with Noah. And in fact, every change of season is God's promise. Whether you're saved or you're not, you are in a relationship, vis-a-vis this Noahic covenant. Every person who enjoys a season on this planet, you're enjoying it because God made this covenant and this promise with Noah. And it's telling us reminding us that every change of the season is a reminder God is not going to bring a flood and wipe everything out. In Genesis 9, verse 1, God blessed Noah and his sons and said, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." Where have you heard that before? Genesis 1, right? So he reiterates this mandate. "The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps from the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered." In other words, you're the masters of the earth. It's like, again, Genesis chapter 1. So you have a reiteration of the creation mandate to subdue the creatures, subdue the creation. And interestingly enough, God institutes a death penalty. In verse 5 and 6, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image." Why does he, it's sort of part of the Noahic covenant here, he implements the death penalty. Part of the reason for that is because some of the chaos and corruption that had come upon the face of the earth was because they were not punishing evil and evildoers and murderers. Now, I'm not trying to get into a debate about the death penalty as it is done, in America or any country that might have one. So it's not necessary to debate about that. But that is to say, in God's eyes, you need to have a check on evil and corruption, because we're made in the image of God. So to respect people made in the image of God, you punish people who would do anything to offend or hurt someone made in the image of God. So if you kill someone made in the image of God, you're kind of forfeiting your own being made in the image of God. Anyway, the Noahic covenant is established with Noah, but really it's with all of humanity. Verse 8, "Then God said to Noah," of chapter 9, "God said to Noah and to his sons with him, Behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every beast of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark, for it is for every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. God said to Noah, This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. I mean, very, very, very repetitious. So this is a big deal. This is a very big deal, and this is, I think, very personal. God is saying, every time you see a rainbow, it is a sign of a covenant God has made to not destroy this world in a flood. Which is to say, God is not going to let things get as bad as they did here ever again. Okay? And that's a very hopeful thing to think. God is not going to let things get as bad as they were in the days of Noah. And that's a very personal promise. I recently discovered this. It's the science of, I watched a video on the science of rainbows. It gets very technical, but I did not know this until I watched this, that every person, when you see a rainbow in the sky, everyone is seeing a different rainbow. Literally, you are seeing your own rainbow. Because the way the droplets work, right, and you're seeing a collection of colors being reflected in each of the billion drops, but literally you are seeing those raindrops with your eyes, and you are the only one seeing that particular rainbow. I mean, you got to watch the video, but just understand, there's not like one rainbow and everybody sees it. Every person is seeing their own rainbow. Okay, just take me on it. And at the center of the rainbow, right, if you were to project, the center of the rainbow is your shadow. Sun's behind you. The center of it is your shadow. And just the way the angles work, it's like 42 to 40 degrees. I don't know, it's really scientific. But everybody is seeing, from all of the billions of raindrops, their own rainbow. All right, just take my word for that. I'll send you the video. I just thought that was unique. And also looking at this, where he's saying the bow in the clouds, it's for every living creature, right? So every creature that can see rainbow, you're just seeing only your rainbow. No one else is seeing that rainbow except for you, and it's a promise between you and God of this covenant. Never again to wipe out the world in a flood. Never again to let the world get to a point like this. He's not going to let his patience with sin build up until there's this kind of worldwide corruption and wickedness, such that every intent of every person's heart is only evil continually. In other words, there's always going to be remnants of people, a group of people who are God's own. There will always be a remnant of people that are God's own on the planet, pleasing to God, used by God for his glory and his purpose. There will be a seed that is going to come. And so all of that is sort of baked in to what's happening with Noah. Noah is not the seed. And he is not the one that it can bring about the salvation of man. He is not perfect by any means, despite being called faithful or finding favor in the eyes of God, because nearly as soon as he gets the chance, in Genesis 9:20, he builds an altar. First thing he does, gets out of the ark, stretches the limbs. Okay, we need to get an altar. We need to start sacrificing some animals. And then Noah finds some land, and he starts throwing out seeds. Hey, Noah, what kind of seeds are those? Oh, it's grape seeds. Oh, what are you going to do with that? I'm making a vineyard. And almost it seems like it's literally as soon as he gets the chance. Verse 21. He drank of the wine and became drunk, and lay encumbered in his tent. I mean, they don't tell you, I think I've come across the children's coloring page yet of Noah with the skin of wine tottering around. I know some curriculum will cover the story, but it's not like it's a coloring page that you make. I remember in Camp Wainola, we did the story of Noah, and he's a very heroic figure. And don't get me wrong, he is, but he's not Jesus. And so I was telling a kid after that story, you know what the rest of the story is. So I pointed him here. And I don't know why, he was super excited about it. He's like, I got to tell my mom. He grabs his Bible to show his mom, look, Noah got naked, and he got drunk and naked, right? And he was so excited about it. And he was excited about it probably for the wrong thing. We should be excited for it in the sense that here is this man of God. And, he's tempted and fell into sin, just like, of course, we do. That means we can't hope in him. So what do we do next? Where do we go from here? Noah's not the guy. The world has just been spared. They give him the same command to, be fruitful, multiply, etc. And that's where we meet Abraham next in the text, and we will get to that next time. So I just think it's very fascinating to me, again, just that idea of the time of Noah being so full of sin and corruption, just a breath of fresh air that Noah might have been. I think you need to think of not only that way for God, poor God over here having to deal with all of us, right? And so how sweet it is when we do utter prayers of thanksgiving or praise or dependence. But even here amongst us, you never know. Someone might really just be surrounded by that all the time, right? A lot of negativity, or be in just a very difficult circumstance, hear a lot of bad news. And what a precious thing it is then for your voice to be the one that might bring some hope, some help, some love, encouragement. Don't think that it doesn't mean something. If it means something to God, surely you can say something that would be of help and meaning to someone. We never know when someone might be going through that. Some will share it in a prayer request, which I am thankful for because I don't want to sit there and guess. There's others who just, I don't know how they do it, but they just are suffering and will never say a word. So then just pray for everybody, care for everybody. Say a kind word, say encouraging word to everybody. You never know what they're going through. So there's maybe a little bit more application in that regard. If you're not a Christian, this is us. This is where we're at as well. This is our condition in our heart. These are the lusts and temptations that we fall into. This is where we are in terms of God's patience with your sin. Do not think, if you're not a Christian here, do not think that God is going to forever put up with your sin, though. Everyone's got a timer. No one lives on this earth forever, in which case you will have to make an account for your life. You don't know when that is. You have no control over that. The only way you can be right with God is a salvation, just like God brought to Noah a salvation out of and through that judgment. And God has provided an ark in his son Jesus Christ, that whoever believes in him should be spared the judgment of God. You're not going to die in a worldwide flood. I can guarantee you that based on this. But you could die of disease. You could get hit by a car. You could find yourself, just slipping on a, this happens all the time in my house, just slip on a toy and boom. And I joke, but is this how I'm going to go? And every time, this is it. And not to make light of it, but that's everybody. You have to stand before God one day and give an account. God, the only way to be spared God's judgment is God's way, the way he made by Christ, his son, dying on the cross first. And do you have any questions about that? If that sounds confusing, I'd love to talk with you. Chat with you more about that. But let's remember, God relates to us. What a fascinating idea. He enters into arrangements, agreements, dialogue, exchanges with us. And we have the privilege to know that we have a God, like we said this morning, who doesn't go back on his promise and his word. If he said he's going to crush that of Satan, he's going to do it. If he says he's going to make a promise to not bring this kind of judgment again, and to spare us, he's going to do it. If he says through Abraham, you're going to have a seed and you're going to bless all the nations and families of the world, he's going to do it. What a good place to be in starting our year, to remember his covenants, his dealings with us.